Hello, namaste, and welcome to Itihas, where we talk about people of the past and interesting historical events. Do subscribe to our channel to join us in this journey as we unravel the pages of history. Today, we have another topic for you all, and it is the Sino-Indian War. The Sino-Indian War, also known as the Indo-China War, was a war between China and India that occurred in 1962. Provoked by a territorial dispute and tensions over Tibet, the war was brief and China emerged victorious. However, the war still casts a long shadow over the Sino-Indian relations, and despite substantial improvements over the year, it continues to influence the bilateral relationship. Still today, the major region of dispute between India and China are, firstly, the Aksai Chin, which is under the Chinese control, and secondly, the Arunanchal Pradesh, under the Indian control at the present date. India claims that the Aksai Chin is a part of Ladakh, whereas China claims the Indian state of Arunanchal Pradesh as a part of southern Tibet. Before moving directly into the war, let's start from the background of the war.
第一进自1950年印军侵占的中国西藏边界重镇达化。
With the partition of India in 1947 and the establishment of the People's Republic of China after the Chinese Civil War in 1949, Nehru became the Indian Prime Minister and Mao Zedong became the Chinese President. Both the government wanted to maintain cordial relations, reviving ancient friendly ties. India was among the first nations to grant diplomatic recognition to the newly created People's Republic of China. Moreover, India gave veto power to China offered to it. At that time, Chinese officials issued no condemnation of Nehru's claims or made any opposition to Nehru's open declaration of control over the Aksai Chin region. But in 1950, the Chinese People's Liberation Army took control of Tibet, which all Chinese governments regarded as still a part of China. Now, the small India-China border at Kashmir region was extended to almost all northern border of India, except in Nepal, Sikkim, and Bhutan. The border was disputed and undemarcated since British and Chinese Empire's time period. Mostly, the border was based on local traditional areas of dominance and natural barriers. In Arunanchal Pradesh, British had made the McMahon Line as border between British India and Tibet, which spreads along the peaks of the highest Himalayas over that region. In 1954, Prime Minister Nehru wrote a memo calling for India's border to be clearly defined and demarcated. In line with the previous Indian philosophy, and Indian maps showed a border that in some places lay north of the McMahon Line. Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai in November 1956 again repeated Chinese assurance that People's Republic had no claims on Indian territory, although official Chinese maps showed 120,000 square kilometers of territory claimed by India as Chinese. Later in 1956, the Chinese constructed a road through the Aksai Chin area, which is under the Chinese control at the present date. India found out after the road was completed in 1959, protested against these moves and decided to look for a diplomatic solution to ensure a stable Sino-Indian border. To resolve any doubts about the Indian position, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru declared in Parliament that India regarded the McMahon Line as its official border. This apparent progress in relations suffered a major setback when, in 1959, Nehru accommodated the Tibetan religious leader at that time, the 14th Dalai Lama, who fled from Lhasa after a failed Tibetan uprising against the Chinese rule. He had a grand welcome in India. According to James Bernard Calvin of the US Navy, in 1959, India started sending Indian troops and border patrols in the disputed areas. The aim of this policy was to create outposts between advancing Chinese troops to interdict their supplies, forcing them north of the disputed line. This program created both border skirmishes and deteriorating relations between India and China. The chairman of the Communist Party of China, Mao Zedong, was enraged and asked Xinhua news agency to produce a report on Indian expansionists operating in Tibet. Border incidents continued throughout this period.
The war is only to repel Indians' aggression.
It might be a different story unless the United Nations are prepared.
In August 1959, the People's Liberation Army took an Indian prisoner at Longju, which had an ambiguous position in the McMahon Line, and 2 months later, in Aksai Chin, a clash at Khonka Pass led to the death of 9 Indian frontier policemen. Negotiations were restarted between the nations, but no progress was made. As a consequence of their non-recognition of the McMahon Line, Chinese maps showed both the northeast frontier area (NEFA) towards Arunanchal Pradesh and Aksai Chin to be Chinese territory. In 1960, Zhou Enlai unofficially suggested that India drop its claim to the Aksai Chin in return to a Chinese withdrawal of the claims over NEFA. Adhering to his stated position, Nehru believed that China did not have a legitimate claim over either of these territories and thus was not ready to concede them. This adamant stance was perceived in China as Indian opposition to the Chinese rule in Tibet. In 1960s, based on an agreement between Nehru and Zhou Enlai, officials from India and China held discussions in order to settle the boundary dispute. China and India disagreed on the major watershed that defined the boundary in the western sector. The Chinese statements with respect to their border claims often misrepresented the cited source. The failure of these negotiations was compounded by a successful Chinese border agreement with Nepal, with Sino-Nepalese Treaty of Peace and Friendship, and Burma in the same year. In 1960, the same year, India started the Forward policy. There were eventually 60 such outposts, including 43 north of the McMahon Line, to which India claimed sovereignty. China viewed this as a further confirmation of Indian expansionist plans directed towards Tibet. During 1959 and 1961, there were continuous skirmishes between the border patrols and minor attacks on Indian posts, leading to the death of some Indian soldiers as well as the Chinese soldiers. At first, the PLA, People's Liberation Army, simply withdrew, but eventually Chinese forces began to counter-encircle the Indian position, which clearly encroached into the north of the McMahon Line. This led to a tit-for-tat Indian reaction, with each force attempting to outmaneuver the other. Despite the escalating nature of the dispute, the two forces withheld from engaging each other directly. On 20th October 1962, the Chinese People's Liberation Army launched 2 attacks, 1,000 kilometers apart. In the Western Theater, the PLA shot to expel Indian forces from the Chip-Chap Valley in Aksai Chin, while in the Eastern Theater, the PLA sought to capture both banks of the Namka Chu River. Some skirmishes also took place at the Nathula Pass, which is in the Indian state of Sikkim. Gurkha rifles traveling north were targeted by Chinese artillery fire. After 4 days of fierce fighting, the 3 regiments of Chinese troops succeeded in securing a substantial portion of the disputed territory. By 24 October, the PLA had entered territory previously administered by India to give the PRC a diplomatically strong position over India. The majority of Chinese forces had advanced 16 kilometers south of the control line prior to the conflict. 4 days of fighting were followed by 3-week lull. Zhou ordered the troops to stop advancing as he attempted to negotiate with Nehru. Zhou sent Nehru a letter proposing a negotiated settlement of the boundary. that both sides disengage and withdraw 20 kilometers from present line of actual control. Nehru's 27th October reply expressed interest in the restoration of peace and friendly relations and suggested a return to the boundary prior to 8 September 1962. He wanted the creation of a large immediate buffer zone and thus resist the possibility of a repeat offensive. Zhou's 4th November reply repeated his 1959 offer to return to the McMahon Line in NEFA and the Chinese traditionally claimed MacDonald Line in Aksai Chin. Facing Chinese forces maintaining themselves on Indian soil and trying to avoid political pressure, the Indian Parliament announced a national emergency and passed a resolution which stated their intent to drive out the aggression from the sacred soil of India. The United States and United Kingdom supported India's response. With the backing of other great powers, a 14 November letter by Nehru to Zhou once again rejected his proposal. After Zhou received Nehru's letter, the fighting resumed on the Eastern Theater on 14th November with an Indian military activity on Aksai Chin and NEFA hours after the Walong battle. The PLA penetrated close to the outskirts of Tejpur, Assam. China had reached its claim line, so the PLA did not advance further, and on 19th November it declared a unilateral ceasefire. Zhou and Lai declared a unilateral ceasefire to start on midnight 21st November. His ceasefire declaration stated, beginning from 21st November 1962, the Chinese frontier guards will cease fire along the entire Sino-Indian border. Beginning from 1st December 1962, the Chinese frontier guards will withdraw to position 20 kilometers behind the line of actual control, which existed between China and India on 7th November 1959. In the eastern sector, although the Chinese frontier guards have so far been fighting on the Chinese territory north of the traditional customary line, they are prepared to withdraw from their present position to the north of the illegal McMahon line and to withdraw 20 kilometers back from that line. In the middle of the western sector, the Chinese frontier guards will withdraw 20 kilometers from the line of the actual control. As a consequence, the war left heavy casualties and losses. On the Chinese side, 722 were killed, whereas about 548 to 1047 were wounded, whereas in the Indian side, 1383 were killed, 1696 were missing, 1047 were wounded, whereas 3968 were captured. With this, the Sino-Indian War came to an end.
扯东地区越过了外法人线，转向东南，逼近自1950年印军侵占的中国西藏边界重镇达瓦。
Thank you for watching this video, and we hope that you guys like this. Do subscribe to our channel for more such videos, and do check out the other videos in our channel. Thank you and have a great day.